The area around the destroyed village of Klishchiivka in the Donetsk region has been the site of fierce fighting for months, in which hundreds of Russians have died. A Russian account illustrates the extreme losses that they are taking in the battle. The Bchich-3 Telegram channel describes how 180 Russian soldiers, convicts, deserters, and stormtroopers were sent in 6 waves in an attack to retake lost Russian positions near Klishchiivka. Only half of the first wave made it, with at least 165 others quickly wiped out. They were brought to Novoluhanska, a whole crowd: convicts, special contingent, recaptured deserters, Storm V stormtroopers. All totally different. Cowardly, brave only when drunk, young, old, daring by nature, deceitful and cunning, or simple, naive, residents of small Russian cities whose sins were brought to the attention of society. They were silent and listened to the order. The order was very simple: to regain the previously lost positions behind the railway tracks in Klishchiivka. They were divided into 6 groups, 30 people in each, and began to wait for darkness. Everyone was shaking. Somewhere 7 kilometers away, where the front was and where they had to go, there was thunder and reddish flashes. The first group, loaded with everything they could carry, was spotted only when they got to the railway tracks, and they began to unwind with artillery and machine gun fire. 16 people were left lying on the rails, but 14, together with our hero, were able to slip past the railway and take their old positions. It was a moment of surprise, but the second group was already expected by the Ukrainians, and all 30 people were destroyed, not even letting them reach the embankment. The third group left in the morning and was also knocked down. They managed to pull out only 2 seriously wounded. At the same moment when the third group was being destroyed on the approach, an enemy sabotage and reconnaissance group jumped into the trenches of the 14th that had broken through. They shot the commander in the face, killed 2 medics, and threw grenades at everyone they saw. We don't know how, but by a miracle of God, but the man in question managed to kill 3 sabotage and reconnaissance group members. Since the commander was no longer there, he took command, shouted something, tourniqueted the wounded with torn-off arms and legs, tourniqueted wounds, injected painkillers, forced the rest to dig in, and asked for help over the radio. All night long they were hit by artillery. A gray morning came, and although it was clear that the enemy had pulled reserves, tanks, and multiple launch rocket systems to the breakthrough site, that the enemy was listening perfectly well to Russian radio communications, the commanders, with dull stubbornness, sent all 3 remaining groups one by one behind the embankment. No one reached those who had broken through. All remained lying on the nameless open space near the railway track before Klishchiivka. The cunning and the simple, those who had stumbled or were fully in sin, at once stepped not into immortality, as they pompously say, but into oblivion. The 14 who had broken through were mashing the ground for several days. In the end, there were 3 of them left: a completely shell-shocked medic, mumbling instead of speaking, some guy with a torn-off ear, and our hero. The wounded he had bandaged gradually died. Then there were more battles, tank fire and drones crawling towards them. They fired back, holding half-buried positions, as if it was the road to Moscow. A day later, only our hero remained alive. There was no one else to advance. The front had turned into a positional one, and only his positions were drawn on the maps as a salient, for which someone in the Ministry of Defense was given a bunch of medals. For 30 days, he held his positions alone, covered himself with the bodies of his brothers during shelling, cried without tears, shouted to the sky, searched in the rucksacks of dead men for ammo, water, energy drinks, so that he could stay awake. At night they crawled towards him. He shot back, and the people in the front line clenched their teeth, hearing the distant battle of a lonely machine gun or automatic rifle. For 30 days he fought alone for everyone, and when, after the 100th time saying farewell on the radio, they finally managed to evacuate him, he immediately fell asleep with his eyes open. Ukraine agreed to a ceasefire to expose Russia's true intentions, Zelensky says. Middle Eastern nations believed Putin was ready for peace while Ukraine was not, thanks to Russian propaganda. Now it's clear, Putin isn't ready. This shift has brought new diplomatic engagement from previously neutral countries.
Did you agree to an unconditional ceasefire? You talked about minerals, about the whole deal.
We talk about a ceasefire. Not because it's, to tell you that it's a matter of bargaining. Yes, I will explain why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because there is the Middle East, who always told me, in tete-a-tete, in other conversations, that Putin is ready for a ceasefire, an unconditional one. It is Ukraine that does not want to end the war. It's Ukraine that doesn't want peace. I mean, Russian propaganda worked very hard there. And I showed very clearly with such steps that we are ready for a ceasefire. But you will see now that Putin is not ready. After this, we had several contacts with the Middle East, with these countries of the global south, countries that before this didn't even with us, didn't really talk much because they were balancing between us and the Russians. And to be honest, they were flirting more with the Russians due to economic relations. So, I am making, I believe for today, the right diplomatic steps. That's what I'm doing.
According to the Financial Times, the European Union rejected Russia's demand for a ceasefire in exchange for lifting sanctions. The EU stated that sanctions would remain in place until the complete and unconditional withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine. The Kremlin insisted on lifting restrictions on a key Russian bank, Rosalkazbank, as part of a partial ceasefire deal. But the EU refused, emphasizing the need to maintain maximum pressure on Russia through sanctions. In Russia, 23 Ukrainian prisoners of war from the Azov regiment have been sentenced. They received between 13 and 23 years in a high-security penal colony. 11 of them were sentenced in absentia, as they had already returned to Ukraine as part of a prisoner exchange. The sham trial was based on charges of violent seizure of power and participation in a terrorist organization, despite the fact that international humanitarian law strictly prohibits the prosecution of prisoners of war. Also, the irony is greater here. You invade a country and prosecute its fighters because they are fighting against you.
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you want to support Warthog Defense, please become our member and get early access to new videos, exclusive members-only videos, and become administrator in comment section. The membership link is in the description.
Rescues every day. We had a guy last week at 6 rescues in 6 days. He's doing the job every day.